Lenovo now owns the Moto brand, but is doing some very interesting things with it. The Moto Z and Moto Z Force are successors to last year's Moto X Style and Moto X Play, here with Lenovo's take on modular smartphones with MotoMods that clip onto the back. The Moto Z is a mere 5mm thick and made in aircraft-grade aluminium and stainless steel, no less, with a water-repellent coating. There's a 5.5-inch AMOLED QHD display, a Qualcomm Snapdragon 820 processor with 4GB of RAM, a sealed 2600 mAh battery, and either 32GB or 64GB of onboard storage, plus microSD, a fingerprint scanner, USB Type-C, and a 13-megapixel main camera with OIS, laser autofocus, and dual LED flash. Almost the perfect Android 6 smartphone for many people, especially considering the MotoMods capability. The Moto Z Force, by the way, is thicker at 7mm, giving a bigger 3500 mAh battery and shatterproof display glass. Plus, there's also room for a bigger camera at 21 megapixel with a wide f/1.8 aperture. Interestingly, neither handset has a 3.5mm audio jack. Both phones come with a USB Type-C headphone adapter. MotoMods are, of course, the headline USP here, and one which has me very excited, which is why I'm giving extra news time here on the phone show. These are snap-on modules. They attach via magnets and connect through the 16 dotted connection points on the back of the Moto Z range. The most basic and boring mods are style shells and are just aesthetic. There's a wide range, but let's move on. Most interesting for me is the JBL Sound Boost Moto mod, which adds a pair of 3-watt stereo speakers that should knock spots off anything currently around, including my Marshall London, though it's a chunky mod, also including an extra 1000 mAh battery plus a kickstand. So tempting for an audiophile like me, though. The Incipio off-grid Moto mod is just a battery booster with an extra 2200 mAh, plus there will be a version with wireless charging. And then there's the InstaShare projector Moto mod with a built-in Pico projector and an 1100 mAh battery to help out, so you can project images and video onto a wall up to 70 inches in size at 480p resolution. Plus more Moto mods to come. There's a rumoured mod with a camera with optical zoom and xenon flash, but I'll believe that one when I see it in the flesh. Also launched since the last phone show is the OnePlus Three, now thankfully buyable directly. By saving cash in terms of being online only, the OnePlus device's USPs are that they're highly spec'd, but cheap. The Three is aluminium unibody and somewhat generic for 2016, but looks very well made with a 5.5-inch 1080p Super AMOLED panel bought in from Samsung, a fingerprint reader, a Snapdragon 820 chipset, and a staggering 6GB of RAM. Clearly not needed yet, but I guess it makes the OnePlus 3 rather impressively future-proof. On the imaging front, there's a 16-megapixel Sony sensor with OIS and f/2.0 aperture and capable of 4K video capture. Completing the spec is NFC, woohoo, USB Type-C and a 3000 mAh battery, and wait for it, a £309 price tag as bought from the UK, making the other Snapdragon 820 powered flagships look rather overpriced. This starts out on Marshmallow, i.e. Android 6, which is just as well, as OnePlus's upgrade record hasn't exactly been stellar so far. Made by ZTE and with echoes of how impressed I was by last year's Vodafone Smart Ultra 6, we now have an even cheaper and decent contender. If not a smartphone for you personally, then for a teenager or partner, someone who's not expecting flagship performance. Which is not to say that the Smart Prime 7 is slow, far from it. It chugs along quite nicely with just a fraction of a second lag when moving around the UI and slower than usual installation of applications and games. Yet it runs these games fine. The 2.5D oleophobic screen is large, bright and glossy and clear. And your average family member is going to be more than happy. And when said teenager or partner manages to drop it and smash it up, £75, buys another one brand new. Yes, that's right. £75 here in the UK, which I think is a stunning value. You see, the Smart Prime 7 doesn't feel cheap in the hand. The materials and the curves remind me of many a mid-range handset like the Moto X range, even old classics like the original Nexus 1, which is appropriate. This is kind of a Nexus Lite. It's a vanilla but tried and tested design with a nice grippy texture on the replaceable back, of which more in a moment, and a stylized, though thankfully never sharp, edge all around the perimeter. In the hand, you could use this down the pub and pretend it was a flagship, and well, I doubt anyone would notice it wasn't. It's that well made. Under the hood, of course, there have been some tech compromises, but the use of Android 6 Marshmallow out of the box means that you get all the RAM and battery life improvements immediately. A Snapdragon 210 chipset and a gig of RAM might sound ghastly for an Android phone for seasoned phone show viewers, but it's really not. I was surprised how smoothly games like Angry Birds and Traffic Rider played on the 720p screen. Under Android 6, it seems like this relatively low-end spec is just fine. Okay, a power user such as yourself is going to expect a dozen apps to stay in RAM at the same time and want lightning fast switching, and that's not going to happen. But for everyone else, this is a brilliant budget experience. Unusually in the current day, the 5-inch display really is just that. The controls are kept capacitive, so you never lose screen space for these. And 720p in LCD form, i.e. with the full RGB pixel stripe, is absolutely fine at 5 inches. I defy anyone to try and complain here, especially at the price point. The back does come off, but this is just so you can stick in a meaty micro SD card, and you'll have to, or at least set it up this way for a family member, because out of the box there's only about 4 gigabytes of storage free. How restrictive this proves will depend on which apps and games are needed, but with a 32 gigabyte card, say, most people will be fine. The SIM slot is easily accessible, and yes, it's locked to Vodafone here, though no doubt unlocking schemes are available as usual. See your local market. The large 2540 mAh battery looks eminently removable, but is covered by a huge sticker that says otherwise, which is a shame. And I didn't want to get my screwdrivers out on this press loan device to test the advice. Still, battery life was just fine, as you might expect given the battery size, given Android 6's doze, and given the lightweight ambitions of the target market. Though a teenager playing games or YouTube all day long, I will obviously dent this battery life massively. I often comment on phone speakers, and that on the Smart Prime 7 is typical budget fare. Pretty loud, but also harsh. Here's a demo. This is full volume. Okay, it's not even that loud. It's a £75 phone though. It'll do. Completing the hardware was a much better than expected 8 megapixel camera. See the samples here, most taken in very average light. It's telling that the results here would have been about right for a flagship from a couple of years ago. And remember again, this is on a £75 phone. Video capture is at 1080p, exceeding the screen resolution, showing that the Snapdragon 210 chipset is a little more capable than you might think. On the software side, the Smart Prime 7 is essentially stock Android, plus some extra Vodafone apps and widgets, all of which can be uninstalled if you don't like them. In particular, I like the way that every single UI interaction, such as a swipe down or tap to get the app drawer or going to the widgets, as here, was given a pop-up help tip the very first time you used it. Plus, there's a whole card-based tip system loaded from Vodafone servers off to the left of the main home screen. This includes beginner and expert tips, though I suspect that every one of these will be known to you already, so I won't bore you with them. Great to see for newbies to Android, though. I still think that 2 gigabytes of RAM is the bare minimum for anyone with any ambitions to speed around a smartphone in 2016, but the budget Smart Prime 7 here manages to confound me and everyone else who's handled it in my life by impressing at almost every turn for such an incredibly cheap handset. Perfect for the family.